privilege for us to say a very good morning, Nico Kleynhans, and thank you for coming through to our studios.
Good morning to you and also to the listeners.
So, ambassador, I've often wondered what it would take to become an ambassador of a country, and what does it mean? What is that role?
One of the hats I used to wear involved me working with ambassadors. And so I've been intrigued by Paul's use of that word in the second letter to the Corinthians, where he says, I am an ambassador of Jesus. Well, basically, an ambassador represents his home country. So in this case, the American ambassador in South Africa represents America. And when you go onto the soil of the American embassy, you're on American soil. You're not on South African soil. And the laws that apply on that soil are the laws of America, not of South Africa. And the South African authorities have no jurisdiction over what happens on that soil. The police, South African police, can't even go onto that soil because it is not part of South Africa. That soil belongs to America. So when Paul writes from Rome and he says, I am an ambassador of Jesus Christ, he is saying, I'm in Rome. I live where the Romans have authority, where the emperor has authority, but I'm not subject to the rules of the emperor. I'm not subject to the laws of the emperor. And my job here as Paul is to represent Jesus to you as Christians and also to the people who are not Christians. That's what Paul is saying. And I find that is really helpful for me in the work that I do, that I understand that. And I want to reflect now on going back to 1979. Now, in 1979, it was illegal in South Africa for Christians of different races to worship together. You couldn't do it. It was just illegal. And if you did, the police would call on the clergy and say to them on a Sunday, how many people of other races, they didn't use that word, they used a far more derogatory term, called on this congregation and worshipped here. Because it was illegal. And I remember the police coming to me fairly frequently and saying, you cannot organize this Bible study. You are breaking the law. Because under the emergency regulations that are now in place, you had people here from Khayelitsha and Claremont. If you keep doing that, we will arrest you and we will put you in jail. Simply because the laws of the land at that moment in time were in conflict with the laws that I have to obey, the laws of God. Now, in 1979, a whole lot of Christians, there were over 200 Christian leaders got together. And they said, what do we do as Christian leaders? And amongst them were people like Desmond Tutu, David Bosch, Michael Cassidy, Beyers Nordia. And they said, what do we do as Christian leaders? Do we keep separating the people of South Africa? Or do we say we've got to have a different model? And what they decided was they would gather in Pretoria and they would invite a few thousand Christians to join them. And for those few days, they would live in each other's homes, regardless of what the law said. And not only would they live in each other's homes, they would have a huge conference. And that conference was to be held in the showgrounds of Pretoria because they needed a venue that could cope with a few thousand people. And at that conference, for the first time in the history of South Africa, people of all colors would speak at the same conference, at the same worship service, regardless of the law of the land. Now, today, of course, if we went to a conference like that and we were all of the same grouping, we would say, what's wrong here? But on that particular conference, it was groundbreaking because for the first time, people of God said, we have an instruction to obey as ambassadors of Jesus, and we need to live differently. And I remember in the run up to that, on the night of that first opening night, somebody went, well, a couple of hundred people went outside of the conference and slashed every single tire of every single car of every single person who attended that conference. And it took hours to find tow trucks who were prepared to come and help so that everybody could get home. But we had our weekend conference anyway. And I had visits from the security police and the military police who said, if you continue helping with the accommodation, you will go to jail. And I remember saying then, please feel free to take me, because at this point, I have a responsibility to live according to what I believe Jesus is calling us to do. And I'm not going to obey the laws of the land which are in conflict. Now, why is this what I'm trying to say today? We needed healing in 1979. And if we waited for the politicians to get there, it would have taken a lot longer, a lot more bloodshed, and we would not have got there. But it took a few thousand Christians who began the ball rolling. Now, in this past week, we have all heard, and I've listened to your news bulletins, that the people who are on getting SASSA grants and who are getting it through the post office are not able to get their money. Now, these are people who are living on the breadline and who can't get the money, which means they can't pay for their accommodation, they can't get their food. There's no action taken against the political leaders. They are not losing their jobs because they ought to. They're the ones who've made the mistakes that have caused the problem, and they get away with it. There are students out there who are supposed to get grants. I don't want to tell you what those students are doing to survive because their grants are not coming. They're hungry. I have to ask myself again, what is it that we as Christians who are ambassadors of God, what are we supposed to do? Do we fold our hands and say it is a problem the authorities have to fix? Or do we say, as an ambassador of God, what is God calling me to do? I'm saying the time has come again that we as Christians say, what is God calling me to do? I'm not saying our job is to get angry or to get depressed. I'm saying our job is to start taking care of people. And if that means we've got to stand up, then so be it. But we've got to get to be God's ambassadors. Thank you.